I'll just use Goku's instant transmission technique to move onto other planets. That is my destiny. I am the universe's end!
Welcome to the first episode of Dark Timeline, a series where we analyze a what-if scenario from the perspective of the villain in the most realistic way possible. Imagine an alternate scenario where Vegeta never helped out against Cell. For those who don't know, in the anime, the Z-Fighters jumped in and did their best, whereas in the manga, the beam clash was extremely quick and no one else helped but Vegeta. Vegeta not helping, combined with Gohan's lack of confidence in that situation, ultimately means that Cell kills Gohan. Dragon Ball Multiverse played with this idea in its own way, where after Cell killed Gohan, he then proceeded to kill the other Z-Fighters. But this seems unrealistic. Considering the fact that Cell doesn't care about the Earth, the beam clash would certainly destroy the entire planet itself, killing all of Earth's heroes in the process immediately. Originally, you see Gohan in the sky after Cell died, which shows that Gohan essentially aimed the beam upwards so that it ultimately didn't wipe out Earth. Cell wouldn't care, so it's unrealistic to imagine Cell killing the Z-Fighters one by one afterwards, when the blast would do it itself. So what would Cell do next after essentially winning and destroying Gohan and all of his friends? Well, unlike Frieza, who runs an intergalactic empire, Cell is basically just an insect-like version of a Saiyan. He's basically Goku and Vegeta in a villain's body, which is why he decided to host the Cell games in the first place. One of the biggest ironies about Cell is that he died the exact same way that he manipulated the Saiyan desire of Vegeta. Vegeta's quest to prove himself against a perfect Cell directly parallels Cell's quest to fight against Goku. Later on, after Goku gave up, his desire changed when he set his sights on triggering Gohan into unleashing his power. He constantly seeks to fight and test himself the way that the Saiyans do, and because of this, it makes sense for Cell to be a permanent disturbance to the universe. So Dragon Ball would essentially become a universe opposite of the one that we know, whereas before, the villains always wanted to go after Goku. But now, Cell would go after any hero or villain or anything that's powerful enough for him to test himself against. This leads us directly into the other world. This is literally the only place where it makes logical sense for Cell to go next. He already knows instant transmission and has already been to the afterlife before, so it's logical to imagine Cell going to the afterlife to fight against any dead fighters that could give him a challenge. Of course, this is rather funny because since Cell is technically alive, if a dead fighter were to kill him, then he would just go to the afterlife anyways since he's already there. In this situation, however, Cell is the one with everything to lose, but at the same time, if he were to ever be threatened, he could just use instant transmission to save himself. Or, if possible, he may even be able to extract any life forms with his tail. Now, we never actually saw Cell absorb someone in his perfect state as his tail retracted, but we did see it in Dragon Ball GT. And if GT is accurate, then this creates an even bigger problem for the universe. But Cell's ultimate threat to the Dragon Ball universe is the fact that he would essentially become a force of nature with no one to contest him, and may cause characters to permanently seize their existence by directly destroying their souls in the afterlife. At a certain point, one of two things would happen. First, Cell may eventually be confronted by the Supreme Kai and Kibito, but this would be a problem for them more than it would be a problem for Cell. Unlike Buu, who is a dumb opponent, Cell is actually intelligent. Cell is also fully capable of using instant transmission, which could always save him in a situation where he's in trouble, as mentioned before. Now, when you consider the fact that it was stated that Cell and Dabura weren't that different in power, and the fact that the Supreme Kai needed help to directly confront Babidi and Dabura, this basically means that the Supreme Kai wouldn't be able to do anything without help. Especially if Cell decided to reproduce and create more Cell Juniors, which would make it even harder for the Supreme Kai and Kibito to do anything. So in terms of the original Dragon Ball manga and even the Dragon Ball Z anime, Cell would truly be the universe's end since Beerus didn't exist in Z, and there are no gods in the Dragon Ball universe in the original Dragon Ball manga and Dragon Ball Z anime. This also means that if Babidi and Dabura were planning on resurrecting Buu, this also couldn't happen as Earth is completely gone. Now what about the magical ball of Buu that was already on Earth? Well, if it somehow survived the explosion of the planet, then it would be floating in space where it would literally be impossible for Babidi and Dabura to ever find. And even if Babidi did find it, he would have no way of utilizing energy to unlock the ball anyways. But in order for us to give this what-if scenario full respect, let's include Dragon Ball Super's concepts of having other deities existing. Now, if the Supreme Kai ever decides to confront Cell over the course of many years while Beerus is asleep, that means he and Kibito would end up dead and Beerus would cease to exist since the Supreme Kai and Beerus are linked together. Keep in mind that even if the Supreme Kai and Kibito just laid low, it's slightly possible that Cell may eventually bump into them over time. In this case, it's not impossible to imagine Cell eventually finding them somehow the way that Goku found them during the Buu arc when he was looking for Gohan. So knowing all of these risks, it would make logical sense for the Supreme Kai to leave Cell alone and eventually wait for Beerus to wake up. Now when Beerus eventually wakes up, Cell is immediately doomed. Because there are virtually no alive characters that could directly oppose him, and because the dead characters pose no direct threat to him since he can escape, it would be very hard for Cell to get stronger unless he foolishly decided to keep blowing himself up and regenerating after getting a Zenkai boost. Now some of you may also bring up the idea of the one-day pass to suggest that maybe the dead fighters may have a chance against Cell, but if we've gotten this far into the video, the afterlife would already have been decimated by Cell at this point. And once again, since he knows instant transmission, he will never really be in danger unless he wants to be. Now, an alternate way of Cell getting stronger would be if he essentially gave birth to more Cell Juniors as mentioned before, and essentially trained with his own kids. So we would basically have a gang of Cells terrorizing the entire universe, similar to what BoJack was in the BoJack Unbound movie. So this is just further confirmation that the universe would basically be in trouble until Beerus or some other entity decides to get involved. Now in the future, specifically the History of Trunks timeline, we also saw that Zeno never got involved in anything Zamasu was doing until Goku directly called him with the Zeno button. And for whatever reason, Zeno and the Angels never did anything about the Goku Black Zamasu threat, as he basically wiped out all of the Supreme Kais under their watch. And because killing a Supreme Kai takes out a God of Destruction, and taking out a God of Destruction basically makes an Angel useless, all Cell needs to really do is kill the Supreme Kais. But the truth of why Zeno and the Kais never did anything is that it was just simply bad writing, similar to what happened in the History of Trunks story. In that specific case, King Kai never did anything to help Gohan and Trunks over the course of 13 years, when in fact he could have easily have stopped the android threat with cooperation and communicating with the namekians on the new Namek planet. But the biggest problem with Beerus is that he may not be the savior that you think he could be. The thing is that Beerus actually has to want to kill Cell, because he has allowed evil villains to exist in the Dragon Ball universe. Let's not get it twisted that Beerus is some sort of benevolent god. He has to want to kill Cell in order for Cell to be eliminated, and if he chooses to not care, then the universe would essentially be in ruins. This would be pretty bad for the mortal ranking of Universe 7, but considering the fact that Universe 7 was so low anyways, it wouldn't really make a big difference. So this basically leaves us with the situation where it's either Zeno, Beerus, or some other god of destruction that has to put a final end to Cell. Of course, the Angels, or Angels in Training, are neutral and can't directly do anything about it, so it's not like we can rely on them to eliminate Cell. Now as a side note, we also have the idea of the time rings. It's also possible that a Supreme Kai may decide to use a time ring to reverse the effects of what Cell has already done, and possibly have direct divine intervention to stop him. The reason why we ruled this out, though, is because the Kais have very strict rules about using time travel even in the worst scenarios. Now, some of you may also be wondering about the concept of Hell and whether or not Cell would try to team up with other villains in the afterlife that died a long time ago. To be specific, this wouldn't really be the first time that we've seen something similar to this, as we saw this in the Otherworld tournament when Cell was teaming up with dead villains, and we also saw it in Dragon Ball GT when he was teaming up with Frieza, and a lot of dead villains came back to terrorize the Earth. But the problem with analyzing this is that this is only really canon to the Dragon Ball Z anime filler scenes because we never really saw these old villains in the afterlife. But if Cell did somehow do something like this or attempted to do something like this, it would essentially set the universe out of balance with alive and dead characters possibly being shifted around, and the universe would be in total chaos. So at this point, it's only necessary to discuss Dragon Ball Super because we already basically analyzed the scenario of what would Cell do in a scenario where there were no other deities besides the Supreme Kais. So for Dragon Ball Super, this ends in two different outcomes. It ends in a bad outcome for our main characters, but a neutral outcome for the universe in the long run if and when Beerus decides to eventually take Cell out. However, the amazing thing about this what if is that we truly get a chance to analyze a situation where a villain has direct access to the afterlife, but is also intelligent. We saw this with Kid Buu near the end of the Buu arc in the anime adaptation, and we didn't put much thought into it since Kid Buu quickly went back to fighting Goku and Vegeta, since he wasn't supposed to destroy the afterlife because that didn't originally happen in the manga. But if we imagine that Kid Buu was really smart and had deeper ambitions, this would have serious consequences on the Dragon Ball universe. Now theoretically, it's also possible that the seal that held Moro away may still eventually weaken and he could be released in the future. But since Cell would basically have ended so much life in the universe, it would be nearly impossible for Moro to form a strong prison gang. And remember, Moro came out way after the point in which Beerus woke up around the time of Battle of Gods. So if Beerus killed Cell by that point, then Moro would have next to no allies to team up with. Now we also have to consider the fate of the Namekians on New Namek. Depending on the exact time that they rewired the Dragon Balls to bring people back en masse, they could try to revive our heroes in planet Earth. But the problem with this is that it wouldn't work because our characters' souls would already have been gone, since Cell would have gone to the afterlife immediately after destroying Earth, since that's the most realistic and in-character thing for him to do given his thirst for a challenge. And unfortunately, the Namekians would eventually be killed over time due to the Cell gang expanding in the universe. So essentially, the fate of the universe depends on Zeno, Beerus, or the other gods from other universes actually caring. And to be specific, they need to care early before more damage is actually done. But if the gods didn't exist, then Cell would truly be the universe's end.